So when we're gardening, there are two things that are really important: the time of year and the place that you plant. So a lot of gardeners, I'm just assuming, I don't like to make generalizations, but I think most gardeners think about like high summer, and that's when their plants are in bloom. What's really important if we want to protect the pollinators is to have plants that are blooming throughout the year. And like in our garden specifically, I would say the only month that we have no flowers at all is probably January. So up through December there are things blooming, and then things start in February. So it's important, like for an example, one of our native bees, the bumblebee, she comes out, she's a solitary bee, so she comes out in March, and there aren't lots of things blooming in March. So you want to have flowers that are blooming in March so that when she comes out, she's very hungry. She spent the winter hibernating. She has to have food to eat. So it's really important to plan your garden from winter really to winter, not just high season.
I love the empathy of that, Karl. Yeah.
But also things like color, like there are people that like certain colors. Most of our native plants, I would say a large percent of them, and this is just from my observation, are yellow. I have a friend who wanted to learn about native gardening, and he's like, I don't like yellow, and I don't want any yellow plants in my garden, but I want to have a native garden. And I'm like, good luck with that. But I would say in our garden, a lot of plants are yellow, a lot of plants are blue, and insects have like an ultraviolet scale, like they don't see red. So it's interesting, there's a plant called cardinal flower, which is red, and it's really quite beautiful. And bees may find it, they might bump into it, then they know it's there, but they can't see red. So there's a lot to know, a lot to think about. But also, before you even start thinking about having the whole season, we need to look at place. Plants like us have a place where we like to live. Like some of us like the ocean, some of us like the mountains, some of us want to live in a condo that has all windows, some of us want a large house. Plants need the right amount of light or darkness, and they need the right amount of water, and they need the correct type of soil. So what I love about gardening is that there is no one true answer, and you need to do research. It's like going to the library and opening a book versus Googling it. So what type of person are you, and how do you like to learn? So there are plants that like full sun. So like zinnias aren't native, but they're a good example again. They like full sun. So if you plant zinnias in part shade, they will never come up. Another example is Asclepias tuberosa, which is also called butterfly weed, which is a milkweed plant for our monarchs. They like dry and they like sun. So if you put them in like a wetland garden, they will drown. So you need to look at all three of those things: light, also temperature, but like light, soil, and water. Those are the three things. So there's no guarantee, but if you do your research before you buy your plants and you put them in the environment that they would like to live in, they will probably do well. So that's really important.
So temperature somewhat can be determined by what grows in your zone, right? You can kind of start with zone plants.
That's right. So there may be, like zones can be quite large, or like an environment where a plant might live. But let's say that a plant in Nova Scotia might also be native to Virginia, but Nova Scotia is much cooler. So if that plant was maybe like in a meadow in Nova Scotia in full sun, in Richmond, Virginia, it would need to be in part shade because it would scorch and die. So that's another part of the research. There is no absolute. And that's another thing I love about gardening, because you're constantly learning and you will never know everything.
So, I like how you think that's a good thing.
I think that makes it exciting. You know, it's about being alive. You know, if you know all the answers, why are we still here?
That's right. And we have a tendency to want to know everything and think we know everything, and we just don't. And getting comfortable with it, like we can embrace that as a wonderful thing. There's growth and change.
There's growth and change. And the garden changes every day, which is also very exciting. And I think to have a garden and not to witness it is unfortunate. So I make sure in our garden, just about every day, I spend an hour in the morning walking around and looking at every single plant, which is quite a challenge.
Uh-huh. And how else do you, aside from, the conditions and the planning, like what is your practice for showing your love to Earth every day? Besides checking on each of them.
Well, I think just having them here is the answer for the love of the Earth. Because here's an example. Like many native plants, not all of them, have deep root systems. So because of that, they filter the impurities in the water when it rains. So they help our rivers and our streams and our oceans and our creeks, and they help everything. So that's also part of it. It's very complex. As we said, this could be a course.
So I think one of the key elements that's taken me a long time, watching Karl, is I think you listen. You listen, and there are messages that are coming all the time to us from the plants about I need more sun, or there's too much water, or there's not enough water. And I think our involvement, because I think the environment and what's happening with Mother Earth and climate change has become so politicized. And it's just like, you really can't talk about Mother Earth in political terms. It's like, and when people say, well, you're just listening to blah, 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 and I go, no, we're listening to the Earth, and I think we both have had personal experiences where we understood Earth is sending messages and it's in crisis. And, one of the simple thing which lots of us humans have witnessed is, when I was a kid and we would drive at night any distance, Dad would have to pull off the side of the road every hour or so to clean the windshield from all the bugs. And now we drive nothing, hour after hour, and there are hardly any bugs. You don't have to pull over and clean the dead carcasses off the windshield.
So is that what you mean by listening?
Yes, because
you're noticing, you're observing.
Noticing. Or like if you're going on a long drive in the daytime, let's say that we're driving from Richmond to central North Carolina. When I was a kid, you'd see birds everywhere. Now you might drive for 3 or 4 hours and not see one bird on your journey.
So you're kind of like scientists that are out collecting
Citizen
data.
scientists.
Collecting data about Earth health. How is Earth doing? And that's how you're listening to Earth. You're watching, you're observing, you're smelling, you're tasting, or whatever.
But we do what we do because of what we've witnessed. Not because, all the doom and gloom, we listen to that too, and that sort of corroborates. But I think we're involved because on a personal level, we have seen or heard or witnessed something.
And when you visit your plants and you're listening to your plants in your garden, like what data are you collecting about your plants and what they need? How do you know?
Well, I think lots of things are happening. I sense them, which I know seems strange, but I sense when they're unhappy. I sense when they are happy, but I'm looking to see if they are growing and if they're growing the way they did, say, last year. Are they having a good year or a bad year? Or maybe because now this plant is stunted, I need to really consider where I put it. So maybe next year I need to move it. And also perennials have different spans of life. Like some of them are short-lived, like they'll live 1 or 2 years, and others may live hundreds of years. But for that to happen, sometimes they need to be moved because they've taken all the nutrients out of the soil. So I need to watch the gardens and see what they're doing. Like, I don't believe you can just plant and then ignore them.
Yeah.
You need to observe them. But also I'm looking at things like, oh, this mason bee loves this plant. Or, oh, this clear-winged hummingbird moth loves this plant. So then I know that we're bringing more species into our garden. And I'm also witnessing things like different butterflies laying their eggs, not just the monarch. There's a plant in our backyard I was looking at and witnessing, and if I wasn't experiencing it, I would have missed it. Silver-spotted skipper, she was laying her eggs on this small bush, and I've never seen that before in this garden or anywhere. So I'm always looking for something that I don't know or that I haven't seen.
And you're considering the whole system, which I think is really great. And like to me, this sounds kind of overwhelming, but like when I was dealing with the caterpillars in my garden, it was just one thing, and I went and looked it up, and it's like, oh, and then this is what the eggs look like. This is what I do with it, and so you can just learn one thing at a time. You don't have to try to take it all in at once.
Because it is so overwhelming. Or an example of that is we have morning glories, which Chris loves morning glories. I like them, but he loves them. So we have morning glories. And I never thought that they were a host plant. I knew that they were a good pollinator plant. But just yesterday, I was like, I want to research the morning glory that we have in our yard. And I discovered that it's the host plant for 5 moths and 2 butterflies, which I had no idea. And I also noticed that because the day before, I was looking at its leaves and I saw scat, or like little poops, and I was like, I've never seen this before. And then I kept looking, and then I found the caterpillars. So it obviously is a host plant, and I had no idea. So.
And then what I learned yesterday, I was home alone, and I was sitting in our front window, and it just felt so good after all of the rain and after we had monarchs in the spring, and we raised and released some monarchs, and then we had nothing. So we kept waiting for the monarchs that are traveling south to visit our property and then lay their eggs so we could raise and release some more. So in the past week, we have had first one monarch coming, and she's ovipositing on our milkweed, but then a second monarch came, and yesterday I was like, oh, they're both here in the front garden right in front of the picture window, and I was like, oh, what's going on? The one is attacking the other one. And I had never seen them move so fast, and then all of a sudden they just dropped to the lawn, and I went, and I peered out, and one was on top of the other, one was on its side, and one was on the top of the other, and I went, oh my God, I thought it was 2 females, and she's killing the other one because they're territorial. And then I went out, and the one on top was a male, and they were, doing their business, and then, so I came back inside, and I said, I won't disturb them, and then the male on top picked both of them up, and flew over to our lemon queen, and landed there for about 3 or 4 minutes, and then picked them up, and flew across the street into the trees, and I was like, oh my God, so then, I got on my device, and Googled it, and it was like, they could be connected for as much as 16 hours, as the transfer occurred. And so that was something new. They said generally it happens in the afternoon, that's what this was, and they could be co-joined for 16 hours, as much as 16 hours. But then later, I don't know if it was a third monarch or one of them's, or it wasn't that 16 hours, one of the monarchs was back. So, and this summer generation of monarchs can they can live 2 to 5 weeks. Okay.
That's beautiful. And constant learning. How exciting. The process of discovery.
That I got to
endlessly.
witness that.
Yeah, with your own eyes.
And I'm never bored in the garden, ever.
Yes, and we're bored with our devices, so Earth is endlessly entertaining.
I've always been bored with devices.
Well, thank you. That was a beautiful discussion about time and place and listening to Earth and learning. Thank you so much.
So we had this idea of putting up one of those little library houses, but not to have just every kind of book in it. We just wanted to have free information and books about native gardening, which supports what we're trying to do.